Hi, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you're watching this. Welcome to Wilmington, North Carolina. I snuck down here for a week of vacation, so my desk is in my bedroom, so that's the bedroom behind me. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about Module 6, mental health and drug and alcohol abuse. So I have some notes to and kind of fillet in with what we're talking about in the slides. First of all, we're going to talk about community mental health. Some interesting numbers on when we talk about it that it's the leading cause of disability in North America and Europe. 20% of American adults have diagnosable medical disorders, and only about 38% receive treatment. Why? I mean, any other disease because of the stigma involved. Uh, Lots of people, the term crazy, wacko, all those kind of things are talk about people with mental health problems, and it's really not true. It's a disease, just like a cough, a cold. But we all know crazy so and so or um, sick, sicko people uh, don't want to admit. Number two, um, we don't really know to ourselves what mental health is. I know uh, people that have clinical depression. Uh, it doesn't, there's not a sign on your forehead that says, I am clinically depressed. If you look at the things that happen about depression, some of the symptoms, you can see that people, change in eating habits, change in sleeping habits, uh, not joy. It's depression just isn't sitting around going, "Oh, woe is me." It's really a sign that we're not doing well with life. So we look through this whole idea of mental health, and we look at mental illness as diagnosable, and they're things that are hard to measure. You have a cold, you have a fever, stick your thermometer in your mouth, reads more than 98.6, you take aspirin. But if you're just not feeling as sharp, as clean as you thought you should be, uh, it could be mental health problems. And again, with only 38% untreated. Now, the other thing I want to caution you about is as an undergraduate, you've probably taken a psych course, at least one, Psych 2. I always love now to get in discussions with people who start diagnosing her. Oh, she's bipolar. Well, well, this morning she was nice to me, and this afternoon she just walked by and didn't even talk to me. Bipolar. Okay, well, I remember that from Psych 2, and oh, that guy is really depressed, Well, why do you say that? Oh, he doesn't smile at all. We, the diagnostic component of mental health is best done by professionals and probably least done by us civilians. The DSM 5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, spells out pretty much what they are. Psychiatrists and psychologists spend an awful lot of time studying this. So I want you to be careful. It's like everything else in life, it's a balance. I think the idea of throwing around terms like bipolar and schizophrenic and all that kind of stuff is dangerous, but it's also how aware we are of what our milieu or people we associate with what they're doing. You find oftentimes we especially see this when a disaster happens, when some guy gets crazy and shoots up the office. And then afterwards, people say, well, he was kind of strange. He really, he had a aluminum foil wrapped around his head all the time. You think? You think that's probably a problem? Yeah. So don't just say I'll never talk about mental illness, but on the other hand, don't use the terms. I A little sea story. I had a student who I was teaching in the Navy, and he was a college graduate. Went to University of Rhode Island, as a matter of fact. And I was trying to do my physical fitness and everything, and I would walk around the base at night after work. And I'd run into him occasionally. It was a small base, it was a teaching command, and I'd run into him. And sometimes I'd have my wife and my son with me, other times it'd be by myself. And I would, maybe twice a week, 3 times a week, I'd see him walking. So one day he knocks on my door and comes into the office and said, "I know what you're doing." And I said, "What's that?" He says, "You're following me." He said, "You're with the FBI." And I said, "No, I'm just a simple old naval guy." He said, "No, no, you're following me." And he said, "And I know you're sending signals into my room." So I said, "Oh, okay." And I said, this probably exceeds my Psych 2 knowledge. I think this guy has got a problem. So I reported it to my boss. And my boss says, "Oh, he was just pulling your leg. He's trying to, joke on you." And I said, "I don't think so." And he said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." So he said, "Bring him in." So we bring him into my boss's office. And my boss says, "I hear Mike is saying you think he's been following you." And he says, "No, no, I never said that." And he said, "He's sending X-ray beams through your." He said, "No, no, no, nothing at all." So he goes out and he said, "Yeah, see, he was just joking with you." Flash ahead about 3 weeks. I come into work the next morning and my boss is there and he says, "You'll never believe what happened yesterday." He said, "I got a call last night about 8 o'clock that the local police picked this guy up. He was wearing 3 or 4 different styles of uniform. He combined all kinds of stuff. And he was running around town, stopping in churches and asking to speak to the minister and telling them that wants them to do something." And the police picked him up. And he went in and he was diagnosed as a schizophrenic. And he had that problem for quite a long time, but nobody ever, he was just a strange guy. So I don't know where that line draws, and I think we all have to run it ourselves. But I guess I want to be casual about the use of the term when you look at mental illness. Don't be diagnosticians for everybody in the world, but at the same time, be aware. Uh, the problems is that we live in a pretty tough life. You notice that when they talk about statistics, they talk about the industrialized countries, United States and Europe. They don't talk about the third world countries. So one of the causes, and then we're more aware of everything today, right, with media. PTSD, excuse me. Uh, my father, who was part of the greatest generation and fought in World War II and all that stuff, when he would hear about PTSD, he says, I don't know what everybody's worried about. All my generation went through that war." And I said, "What about they used to call it shell shocked. What about the guys who were shell shocked back then?" Well, they were, yeah, they were there, but we were just changing the names and we're realizing that some behaviors are not are mental problems, and we want to care for that. Suicide and substance abuse, I think the suicide rate and substance abuse rate are rising, and they are mental health problems are a contributory, if not a causal factor of that. So we want to watch that also. Uh, what's the history of mental health? Well, boy, it started out, with people going into institutions in the Middle Ages. Either people took care of you, or you went into an institution and you were treated. Um, in Then we started saying we want to use the uh, moral treatment, where they would send people to the country to relax, take you out of your stressors and put you in the country. Uh, had some good results, but the country's only so big, so it kind of ran out of space. And so then they went to the state hospitals in the 1800s. Um, Good idea. They're sick, they go to a hospital, but the mental health hospitals turned into a thing we call snake pits. One of the Geraldo Rivera, if you know who that is, he's not as big anymore. He's on Fox a lot, but he did a big expose in New York of a state mental hospital. And they're really heavy use of restraints, heavy use of drugs that kept the patient in a suspended state. There was too much capacity for what they did. Staff load was large, big problems. So they started introducing medicine and medical procedures, electroconvulsive shock therapy, which I always thought was crazy. And I've talked to a psychiatrist in one of my last jobs, and he still uses it on occasion. And he said sometimes for really deep clinical depression, it's effective. But other colleagues I've talked to are probably not quite as high on it. Lobotomies were practiced where they just go in and up in through your eye and scramble a part of your brain that was causing the problem. They quickly went away. They had some. The results were the after effects of the results were far worse than the mental health illness itself. Right after World War II, we started the National Institute of Mental Health. And the biggest change happened in the 60s. It really got to be, it was called deinstitutionalization. And we started looking at the mental health homes and saying, we got to get these people back mainstreamed. We got to get them back in society. And they never get better sitting in a mental hospital tied down or wandering around all day there's several acts happened by Congress, and what they wanted to do is serious people stayed in seriously problem mental health people stayed in facilities, but we let tons and tons of people out. Somewhere in 60-70% of the people were mainstreamed to some sort or the other. So we start trying to figure out how do we give them care and provide them this mainstream, and it's been extremely difficult. Many critics of the deinstitutionalization process, but it was better than what we were doing. But it's still not the panacea for anything, for sure. We look at this whole process, and it's one that's really problems everywhere you turn. First of all, people don't want to be accused of having mental illness because that doesn't mean that is much different, much more stigma in society. There's a widespread occurrence of it, but there's very very small groups of people who are treating it and are treatable. And the problem itself kind of comes in back and forth on itself. One of the classic, and I don't know if you guys have worked in mental health, but one of the classic things is they work real hard to get you on a regimen of medicine, oral medicines, and you start to feel better and better and better. And what's the first thing that people in mental health do is when they start to feel good, say, geez, I'm back. I don't need the medicine anymore, and they stop taking the medicine. So they become very cyclical. They get well, and then they get sick. They stop taking the medicine, get sick, well, and that their highs stay the same, but their lows keep getting lower and lower and lower. I have two friends I know that have relatives that committed suicide on this regimen, where they would take their medicine and everybody would love them and they'd be great and they'd be really fitting in, and then they decided, no, I don't want to take it, and it led to suicide. Mental health in jails and prisons, and we'll talk a little bit about prisons later. We again, as a society, we have this kind of mixed feeling. Prisoners have to be punished, and so we punish them, and then at the end of the prison time, what do we do with them? We let them back out again. So the reoccurrence rate on prisoners is fairly high. And we don't do anything, and we don't spend a lot of money or a lot of time or a lot of energy in mental health in prisons either. So how do we prevent this? Well, there's the old thing we used to talk about, mental hygiene, and it's the primary, tertiary is reducing the prevalence by shortening the duration of episodes. Primary is reducing the incidence completely, and then tertiary is treatment rehab. So we talk about the different treatment approaches. There's psychopharmacology, That's what we give drugs. Big business today. Psychokinetic drugs and regular drugs. How many people do you know, and you may be one of them, and I may be one of them, that go to the doctor and say, geez, I'm really feeling bad, and bang, Prozac, Zoloft, prescribed by your family practice physician. Now, if you talk to a real mental health professional, if you have a mental health problem or depression that needs Zoloft or Xanax or something, or Zoloft or Prozac or something, that should also be accompanied by psychotherapy. And we don't want to do that. I don't know if any of you, I had a relative who needed psychotherapy, and so we went to, it was part of an insurance plan, and so you go there, and there's an office, and as soon as you get done in the office, they put you in this little, the waiting rooms are like little confessionals, little cubicles. So it was only you and then the people that were there. So no one could see anybody else. And you came out the sides and went to offices because people don't want to be seen. Another interesting thing about why this is a tough problem, a tough nut to crack. When we did yellow page ads for our doctors, all the doctors wanted big yellow page ads in the local phone books and everything. Our psychiatrists and psychologists wanted them in adjoining counties. They just had like a regular listing of their name. John Smith, M.D., practice in psychiatry. In the next town over, he had marital counseling, drug and alcohol abuse, blah blah blah. Because people don't want to go to doctors in their hometown, don't want to be seen in their hometown, going to psychiatrists. So we were getting people from the town next to us, and our people were going to the guys over there. So again, this dichotomy we have of having a problem but being very reluctant to treat it. And this is one of the few cases. Sometimes STDs are that way, but most of the other stuff we want to get treatment. But this has a tremendous social stigma. So psychopharmacology, schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, anxiety, panic, OCD, they are all have drugs. Some of them have tremendously deep side effects, tics. People that have taken them and you talked to said, I just feel like I'm a zombie. I feel like the world's passing me by. I've kind of lost the thing that makes me me. ECT is in there too. Psychotherapy is where there's all kinds of types of psychotherapy. Cognitive behavioral is the biggest one right now. It works in less severe cases, but it's kind of a heal yourself thing. The most psychotherapists you talk to say that the patient, you just by listening and providing a clue here or there, the patient starts to realize what they need to do. And so that's, I say, for less severe cases. Technology, we can do now. We can do it over the phone. We can do it like we're doing here. Self-help groups, we've seen all those, the Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous for people that have obsessive compulsive traits for that. We've seen a lot of different groups for depression. So those are some of the things that can help. What's the problems in the United States? Big staff turnover, pretty much fragmented system, if there's a system at all. We look at it in two different ways. We look at it as a disease, and we look at it as like, I don't want anybody to think that I'm crazy. One of the other pieces in here they talk about in our book is that most people that have mental illness are not violent. Well, wait a minute. We all know that the guys that get crazy and shoot up their office they have mental problems. And the problem is with that is that's who we hear about. So the hundreds and thousands of people that have mental illness that just get up and do their best every day don't make the headline. The guy who shoots up a school makes the headline, and always so. For an adult, for a human being to go in with a gun and kill people is an aberrant behavior. It's a symbol of mental illness. So don't think everybody with mental illness is a violent criminal, because they're not. And again, think back to Gapfinder and all that the facts sometimes interfere with our feelings. We don't let don't. I have an expression I always tease about and says, "Don't let facts interfere with your emotion." You feel that everybody with mental illness is out to kill you. You know, does that become a reality? Um, so, bottom line on mental illness, very prevalent, still difficult to treat because of the stigma involved. Uh, Many different modes and modalities of treatment. Meets with success, but there's still lots of areas that we're just not sure of. And then mainstreaming has been a very controversial field in mental health, but we're doing it right now. So that's kind of some takeaways and some ideas I have on that. The next is drugs and alcohol. Um, I believe alcoholism is a disease. DSM-4 also rates it as a disease. We look at again, the controversy about drugs and alcohol. Why? Even back in my day when I was a young lad, people would say, "Well, we have to legalize marijuana because it's just like alcohol," and so that's the big feeling, like it's just it's no worse than alcohol. Well, is alcohol good? Yeah. Alcohol's been a part of society forever. I mean, they've been distilling the grains from the BC days. Uh, People abuse it. What causes abuse? There's tons of different things they talk about in our notes. Society, family, nature, nurture, personal factors. You know, Getting high, getting a buzz off alcohol. Alcohol was legal, and you saw what happened when we tried to make it illegal during Prohibition. Socioeconomic environments, certain cultures have more problem with alcohol than others. Uh, but it's an issue. Um, so we'll talk about alcohol and tobacco because they're the easy ones. We're trying to do away with tobacco, and anybody who smokes knows it's not good. I smoked for a while, and I knew it wasn't good, but I still did it. Anybody who drinks to excess knows it's not a good thing. I used to do that. I don't do that anymore. So when you look at the scope of these drugs, they're both legal. We keep them away with this sin tax. Pack of cigarettes now. It kills me. I go into the store and I don't even look, but sometimes it beats me in the eye. $9 a pack. And I went, oh, but that's all in taxes. And we think the more money we put on, the more we'll discourage them. And to effect that's happened. But the people who still do are just denying something else because of the cost. So we're back in here in like lots of things in society. We're formed from the Puritans who came over, who believed all these things were bad for you, and we now but we have them. So any
Let's
bad
take
effect.
River Road southeast Belleville.
Excuse me.
In 500 feet.
I'm
Turn right on Sandy Grove
stop
Place.
here, and I'll pick it back up when I get back. I have an appointment right now, so we'll finish up. You'll just see it run straight through, but I'll finish up and get it up tonight. Okay, talk to you later. Bye. Okay, I'm back again. So where we're talking about drugs, and we're talking about the two official legal drugs, alcohol and nicotine or tobacco. Then we come to a semi-quasi group in here, which are legal, but only legal with scripts. And so we read about the big oxycodone scandals, and we talk a lot about abuse of prescription drugs. And again, if the problem were so simple, it wouldn't be a problem, as I always say. So the problem with drugs are that people get them and become dependent upon them. And the medical profession, some of them are very, very good at it. Other doctors aren't. I worked with a doctor who was 73 4 years old when I went to work with him. He was a legend in the practice. This was a rural practice in Missouri. And the city was, a regular old city now, but when he first came there, right after the war, a woman was pregnant out on a farm, and he got on a horse because it was snowing so bad. There was cars where he got on a horse and rode out and slept on a couch for a day and a half and delivered the baby. That became, when you talk about courses, we talk about courses with culture and organizational management and such, and talk about corporate culture and legends and myths. That was a legend at that practice, Gus and the horse. And it was kind of we had a little thing in the lobby about it, and it was kind of the standard of excellence for our staff, how far you have to go for the patient. But anyway, Gus believed that patients shouldn't be in pain. So if patients came in pain, Gus would give them medications, especially people who are, quote, as they used to say down in southeast Missouri, down in the back. So people with back pain. Gus retired, so we brought in a young, new family practice physician to take over Gus's practice. And about a month later, he came in and we said, every patient I see is addicted to pain medications, and they're junkies. And he said, I'm not going to give it to them because they don't really need it. And so that was a long transition we had. But Gus's feeling was that his job as a physician was to alleviate pain. Another physician said, no, it's not to get people dependent on drugs. A similar talk about legal drugs that I've had is I worked at a practice one time, and we had an oncologist. And so one day I get a knock on the door from the state board of drugs and dangerous drugs. It was in Missouri, and an inspector there who's a former state patrolman, and he had like 4 or 5 state patrolman things on, a little button on his lapel and everything. So, and he was investigating a case because they were tracking how much painkiller this doctor used on a particular patient. And he told me they were in the process of investigation, and this was their official notification. So I went up to see the physician, and he was an oncologist. And I had mentioned the patient. He said, the man is dying of bone cancer. And he said, bone cancer is one of the most painful cancers. And he said, I'm giving him just enough so he can die. And he said he's going to die probably in another month and a half. He said he's on his last legs. And he said, I am not going to not give him drugs at this stage in his life in hospice. So how we treat patients in hospice care, how we treat patients day to day with legal drugs, but how we abuse those drugs, how the patients abuse those drugs, and the doctors, lots of medical people, don't feel they have an obligation to police the patient's use. And lots of them feel that their job is to alleviate pain. That's a real issue. How do we deal with that? Well, now we're suing the drug companies because of we feel that they overmarketed their drug, and that they made promises about it that weren't smart, and they went crazy and made zillions and billions of dollars. The second thing we're going after doctors who overprescribe, both inadvertently and then doctors who overprescribe crookedly. I mean, there's doctors in every place I've been that have been arrested for selling script pads with their signature on it, and oxycodone. Percocets, what are $20-$25 a pill on the street? Oxycodones are somewhere around there too. So you can make a business out of just writing scripts. So how that's a problem with drugs. The other problem with drugs is just stupid things. I've seen here in North Carolina that every police station has a place where you can dump prescriptions you don't need. And so I challenge all of you to go in your medicine cabinet, or where you keep your scripts, and find, there's a script for amoxicillin that I got 4 years ago. I forgot, I only down to the last 3 pills. We should get rid of those. So anyway, that's a problem in drug abuse, is legal drugs, prescribed drugs, and over-the-counter drugs that are misused. The second one is illicit drugs. that falls in all the roofies and meth and heroin and marijuana in some states now. Um, the synthetic marijuana, the opium and their derivatives, heroin and such, cocaine, crack cocaine, LSD, mushrooms, uh, stimulants, depressants, uh, and club drugs or designer drugs, roofies, ecstasy, uh, other things that are kind of supposed to make you mellow or make you excited or whatever how you want to do. And then finally, the steroids that people use to get great bodies. No. So anyway, we how do we treat that? And unfortunately, in the United States, how we treat it is a crime. We treat it as a crime, and we treat it by prison. And so, if you look at the number of people in prison, and I've heard all kinds of statistics, but for using drugs, it's frightening. And the feeling, I guess, was back to the Puritan thing: is if we punish you for doing something, you'll never do it again. Well, maybe if it's like staying out too late at night. We all remember those days. I guess we all do. I do. I had a curfew, and if I was late for the curfew for the next month, I didn't get out. So, probably punishment. But a person who's addicted to drugs, the punishment is not does not prohibit drugs. And we put people in prison, and there's drugs in prison. So we treat it very much as a punishable offense, and our prisons are filled with drug abusers. Uh, to the CERN of, I heard numbers as high as 60 and 70%. And again, there's no guy, I'm a bank robber, I'm a drug user, I'm a this. The drugs are mixed in all through that culture in prison. There's other crimes that people use and that do use drugs. So how do we take care of that? There's several countries now that are legalizing hard drugs, not marijuana, but other drugs, and having people come to a facility, clean needle program, and have a lot of Portugal has got a tremendous program for people who want to get off drugs, and they don't criminalize it. Um, but again, you can see how these are all public health issues. And when we first started the course, we talked about the difference between medicine and public health, and public health is kind of a step above. It's kind of the 50,000-foot view. So we could talk about depressants and stimulants and the medical aspect of it. What we're really looking to do is talk about what's the policy. How do we best improve the health of the community, the health of the population, in all these different things we're talking about. We've talked about ethnicity, we've talked about age, and how the different health problems occur at different age cohorts. Different ethnicities have different issues with drugs. I mean, with sickness, and then drugs kind of go across the population. I think that this chapter, or this unit 6, is one we should probably say it doesn't matter who you are. It will come to roost. Mental illness, smart, rich, dumb, poor, African Americans, Caucasians, whites, Indians, everybody has the opportunity, and I use that word lightly, the opportunity to become, to have mental illness and to become addicted to drugs. One of the things that always kills me is when you see people that have thrown away their careers, thrown away everything that's good and wonderful in their life to stick a needle in their arm. How many popular musicians, comedians, people that are just what we think, we look at them and go, boy, they're on the top of the world, and throw it all away, even their lives, for the thrill of a needle in your arm. So it's a pretty significant problem, and it's also a very significant public health problem, and that's kind of why I want to talk about it. So how are we handling it? Unfortunately, the majority of our again on mental health, we don't have a really set program. We've done this mainstreaming, and that's probably not as been as successful as we'd like. On drugs, we made it criminal, and so we've really kind of inflamed the situation rather than putting it down. But on the legal drugs, alcohol, nicotine, and in most 20 states now, marijuana. How do we control that, and what do we do? What is our position as a society, not as a government? The government has certain tools, but what do we do as a society, as a public health person, to make those happen? And that's kind of the challenge to the future. So we have a lot of federal agencies. We have drug councils. We have local drug councils. We have all kinds of prevention. They've proven most of these are pretty ineffective. I remember my son went to this thing, DARE, in grade school, I think it was. And then, we're gonna get him at the cradle and teach them not to use drugs. The program was an absolute flop. The people who didn't use drugs before DARE wouldn't use drugs after DARE when they get older, and the others did. Where are drugs prevalent? Lots of times in poor economic depressed communities, because it's a way to get out of your troubles. Take a toke, take a hit, and things look good for 15 minutes, an hour, 2 days, whatever. But it's transcendent. I mean, go to an exclusive ritzy-doo club and people are doing cocaine. So it's not a problem of economy. It's a problem of lots of other things. And I think most important is that the rich people in Hollywood or wherever you want to call them that are doing drugs are treated an awful lot differently than the poor American who's caught with crack. And I think that they've finally changed that. But the difference between cocaine and crack means they have a whole different punishment. And crack is cheaper, and it's used mostly by poor socioeconomic groups, and they go to jail longer than people that are doing cocaine. So there was a great TV show recently in Narcos, and it talked about Pablo Escobar in Colombia, and the money that's involved in this is staggering. And I'm always a believer that where the money is what drives us all, unfortunately, today. Okay, so that's about it for today. I hope you are having a good week here after 4th of July. Remember, we only have next week and the week after ends on a Friday, so we're cruising fast to the end of the semester. If you're having trouble, please call, write, send a carrier pigeon, do whatever you can. I'm here and available to help you any way I can. And just keep doing good stuff, and we'll see you later. Bye.